We will have four panelists plus a moderator. Dr. Benjamin Carson, who we already heard from this morning, will be one of the panel members. A former member of the Academy, the class of 1994. Come on up, gentlemen. Dr. Francis Collins, whom has been referred to already this morning. He's passing me right now for discovering the development of the gene mapping techniques. Dr. Richard Dawkins. I think, Kathleen, you're going to give a more thorough introduction, or should I continue it? All right. Let me just give you a little bit about Dr. Dawkins. He is being inducted into this year's class, 2006, one of the most influential scientists of our time. He was born in East Africa. He knew that before Dr. Wells had traced it for him, and grew up fascinated with animal behavior. At Oxford, he fused the study of animal behavior with molecular biology and brought about a radical change of perspective in evolutionary theory, posting the gene itself rather than the larger organism as the object of natural selection. He has been called Darwin's Rottweiler for his passionate defense of evolutionary theory. His upcoming book is called The God Delusion, from Oxford, England, now being inducted this year, Dr. Richard Dawkins. And also joining us on stage is another member of the class this year, Daniel C. Dennet, a brilliant guide to the frontiers of cognitive science. Dr. Dennet has drawn on the latest findings in neurology, psychology, linguistics, computer science, and artificial intelligence to explain the phenomenon of consciousness itself. One of his latest books is Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. The director of the Center for Cognitive Studies at Tufts University, Daniel Dennet. And all of that is to discuss, we've looked at science all morning, now we're going to throw in faith. And what does that mean? Science and faith, and the conflicts in some people's minds. And moderating that, are you still with WJLA? Mm-hmm. From Washington, D.C., a good friend of the Academy, Kathleen Matthews, a 21-year veteran of television news in Washington, news anchor at WJLA. Those of you who have been in Washington, an ABC affiliate. She's been awarded 9 Emmys for news documentaries and for a nationally syndicated program, Working Women. And incidentally, her last name Matthews is because she is married to Chris Matthews, but she's a lot nicer than Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, Kathleen Matthews.
Thanks very much. Dr. Carson told us to get out of our safety zone, and that's what we're going to do right now. That's what this panel is all about. I'm actually a news broadcaster who wanted to be a brain surgeon, but I was failed by my pre-med courses first year at Stanford University, so now I get to ask questions to neurosurgeons, doctors, and scientists. But it's great to be here. You know, as a news broadcaster, every night our shows are filled with medical breakthroughs. This is what people really want to hear about today. But we also have in the headlines so often the collision of science and religion. Embryonic stem cell research is a great example of that. And so that's what we want to talk about today. And so for each of our panelists, and Ben, let me start with you. What I'd like you to do is very briefly talk about the work you do and how your faith informs your science and how the science informs your faith.
Okay, well, as a neurosurgeon, obviously I spend a lot of time dealing with the brain and the nervous system, and I've been extraordinarily impressed by how complex it is. I'm also very much interested in human development and social development of individuals. And as a pediatric neurosurgeon, spend a lot of time dealing with children and dealing with human potential. And when I combine that with the scientific background, I tend to think that human beings are very different from other creatures. And I think that's probably where I differentiate with some of my colleagues here on the panel who tend to think that it's all one continuum. However, when you look at the human brain and you look at what we're capable of, there is an extra sense of what I call spirituality, something that takes us beyond what an ape or a dog or a cat or a mouse is able to do, that makes us special, that makes us in charge of the environment in which we live. And I remember once I was talking about that in an article in Parade magazine, and a guy wrote in and said that I was a species. not a race, it's a species, because I was indicating that there was something special about human beings versus other animals. But I'll be very interested to hear what those who disagree with that believe.
Dr. Richard Dawkins, if you would tell us a little bit about your work as an evolutionary biologist, and also your new book, The God Delusion, which I think tells the audience here where you come from.
I believe that the existence of a supreme being, a supernatural God, is a scientific hypothesis like any other. The universe with a supreme creator would be a totally different kind of universe from one without. And therefore, I have no patience at all with those among my colleagues who say something like, science and religion have nothing to do with each other, they don't come into collision with each other, they are about totally different things. They are about the same thing, they're about the nature of the universe, and they can't both be, it can't both be true that there is a supreme being and that there is not. That is a scientific question. Whether we'll ever be able to answer it with certainty by scientific means isn't clear, but it is a scientific question. Now, one of the main ways in which, from a scientific point of view, people try to demonstrate the existence of a God is what can be called the argument from improbability. If you look at most of the scientific arguments, such as they are for God, they're actually arguments against evolution. And it's very easy to see why this is, because Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is a stunning example of a reversal in human thought historically. Before Darwin came along, it was possible to say, because living things are so amazingly complicated and improbable in a statistical sense, therefore there has to be a creator. What Darwin did was to blow that argument out of the water. Incredibly, as it must have seemed, Darwin showed that it is possible to get things as complicated as the human brain, as all the wonderful things we've been hearing about, by totally non-designed means. You start with a very, very simple beginning, and you work up by gradual degrees, every one of which is explicable and understood, to the prodigies of complexity that we see in the living world. Now, Darwin, of course, only dealt with the living world. He didn't deal with the cosmos. And we need a completely different kind of explanation for the universe. But I see Darwinism as a consciousness raiser. It raises our consciousness as a species to the power of science to explain things which would otherwise have seemed completely inexplicable. And the final thing I want to say is that when people use the argument from improbability, they do it in a rather not intentionally dishonest, but amounts to a dishonest way. The form of the argument goes like this. We have discovered, they say, a gap in, for example, Darwin's theory. There's something you can't explain. The elbow joint of the lesser spotted weasel frog has never been explained. Therefore, God must have done it. Now, notice the dishonesty in that kind of logic. You say we have two hypotheses. Hypothesis A, evolution, hypothesis B, God. We think we found a flaw in hypothesis A. We don't even look to see whether hypothesis B can solve the problem. We just say by default, therefore hypothesis B must be right. That's no way to do science. On the contrary, the hypothesis that a divine designer did it is itself postulating a being of staggering improbability in his own right. And whatever arguments one deploys against evolution will backfire 100-fold against the theory of the divine designer.
Dr. Daniel Dennet is an expert in cognitive sciences, literally explains consciousness. So